Welcome everybody to the latest edition here of our spring training, looking back at the 2024 legislative session. But don't you fret, we will also look forward to what is already on the agenda for 2025. I appreciate the participation today of our partners at the Wasatch Front Regional Council and at the Mountain Land Associations of Governments. I'm Cameron Dale, the Executive Director of the League of Cities and Towns, and this will be a team effort between WFRC, the League, and MAG. And so MAG and WFRC, if it's all right, I'll just introduce everybody right now. And then as we get into the song and dance, then everybody can just pick up on your respective bills. So from League staff perspective, we have Carson Eilers, our Policy Director, Molly Wheeler, our Deputy Director, Meg Ryan, our Senior Land Use Manager, Cassidy Hansen, our Communications Manager, and Liam Threlkill, who's our Project Manager and Policy Analyst. So we will be manning the chat room. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and whoever is presenting each bill can answer those, or the different staffers will be responding to. From our friends at MAG, we have Lanice Davenport, and I think that's it, right, Lanice?
That's it. Thank you.
Perfect. I passed the quiz. And Lanice manages all the legislative affairs for MAG. And Lanice, what's your official title at MAG? Because you do a lot more the rest of the year too.
Yeah, the MPO Director.
Perfect. And then from WFRC, we have Andrew Groover, the Executive Director. We have Miranda Jones-Cox, who is the Government Relations Manager. And it's just the two of you, right? Perfect. Okay. Well, here's what we hope to achieve in this webinar over the next hour or so. We want to give you an update on the bills and appropriations that passed in the transportation and infrastructure spaces. Take whatever questions that you have. This webinar will be available on the League website and likely WFRC and MAG's websites too. We did a similar spring training webinar a week and a half ago on land use. That one went for 2.5 hours, and I think I speak for all of us when I say, let's not let this one go 2.5 hours. The land use one could have gone for longer, and that is available on our website, both the PowerPoint and the webinar. It was really worthwhile and productive, so thanks for everyone who participated there. We also will have another webinar in 2 days that is really more of the general update, so there'll be a lot of bills on HR and finance and public safety, basically everything else that isn't land use and isn't transportation growth related. So both of these will be available on our website and hopefully in Friday Facts this week. And then through April, we will have a bunch of events ranging from the mid-year conference to the various conferences for city managers and American Planning Association and others. And then the League will be doing regional trainings with the different AOGs around the state, including MAG and WFRC in the weeks to come. We also will have our legislative recap on our website, and kudos to MAG and WFRC for already having their recaps up. Ours is still in progress, but that's also in part because we tracked a record number of bills. And so Carson, let's get underway here and let's just talk about the key themes from this past legislative session. It was a $28 billion budget, the highest budget that the state's ever had. The highest number of bills that the legislature has ever passed, 591, of which 584 were signed into law. 7 were vetoed last week. And then because the legislature considered a record high number of bills, the League tracked a record high number of bills. I'm not bragging about that. That is simply a statement of fact that it's a record number of bills. And kudos to League staff for staying on top of all of them. And we are appreciative of partners like MAG and WFRC as we work together tirelessly to stay on top of all these bills and appropriations. Carson, the key themes from the session that apply to transportation, but also I think are really about everything that happened. I already hit on the record here, but there are 3 messages that we as local governments were pushing to the legislature that I think resonated this year better than they have in years past. Partnership, not preemption. The state doesn't have a surplus, and neither do we. And then affordable home ownership and sustainable infrastructure. On that first one, partnership, not preemption, this is something we've preached for several years. And I think with each passing year, legislators are more and more responsive to this message. And everything works better when we partner rather than facing conflict one with each other. We respect the role of the state and ask the state to respect our role as local governments. And I do think the last 3 years in particular have just gotten better and better in this space. So thank you to state leaders for their partnership. A key indicator of this was that message that's listed there is the theme number 3. The state doesn't have a surplus and neither do we. Last year, we tracked all of the bills that had an aggregate fiscal impact on cities, and it was well over $100 million of unfunded mandates that would have negatively impacted local governments. This year, we never had to even get to the aggregate spreadsheet. Last year, we shared that with the governor and we shared that with the House and Senate leadership, and we were successful at modifying bills that way. This year, most legislators were very responsive when we said, your bill will have this negative fiscal impact. They said, nuts, we don't want that. Let's work together and figure this out. So I think that message really resonated with them. And then the affordable home ownership and sustainable infrastructure. We spent a lot of time at the spring training last week on the land use bills, but the sustainable infrastructure piece gets to transportation and really talking about a variety of tools in the toolkit to pay for infrastructure to facilitate quality of life, and really this laser-like focus on affordability and home ownership in the housing policies that the legislature enacted. The last 3 key themes: data matters. That has also improved in this past session, has improved year over year the last few years. And that data also relates to transportation and the need for more transportation investment. It is an election year. There's no getting around that. I'm not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing this past legislative session, because ultimately I feel really good about how this session went. But it's just something we were constantly aware of as we went through the sessions, that legislators knew who wasn't running again, and they knew who was running against them. And then this is probably the most important one, even though it's March 26th, and it's a year-round session. So we're going to take the next few minutes to celebrate what happened last month and talk about what it means for cities, but file this theme away for the end of the call, because during this spring, the League, WFRC, and MAG, we want to know what we should be prioritizing for the interim, because we're already getting requests from legislators and others about next year. And it truly is a year-round effort that simply culminates with the passage of bills in the wintertime. Carson? Okay, with that, I will turn it over to our friends at WFRC to talk dollars and cents.
Hey, thanks, Cam. Before we get into bills and specific pieces of legislation, we wanted to first touch on appropriations. And I've been kind of sharing this as we've kind of wrapped the session, but this was another significant year of multimodal transportation investment from the legislature. We've seen this over the past 3-ish years or so of, billions of dollars of investment going in each year, specifically for transportation. And we saw that yet again this year. I'll go quickly, but just want to note a few large appropriations that were quite notable. The first one being over $1 billion into roadway transportation funding. So this is into the Transportation Investment Fund to be programmed and prioritized by the Transportation Commission at UDOT. So that's $775 million one time, $330 million ongoing. That will go to ultimately free up existing debt and then allow for the TIF funds, which we're paying for debt, to be used to program for those projects. So again, I don't know how to make it so clear, but $330 million ongoing is just, it's a lot of money and provides a lot of stability to UDOT in their transportation planning program. So very notable there. An additional appropriation is that $45 million ongoing to the Transit Transportation Investment Fund, specifically for commuter rail investment. This was a priority of WFRC and a lot of our other transportation partners this legislative session, which is to provide additional stable ongoing sources of funding to transit. So very excited about this one. And then there were a few appropriations for specific projects. Notably, there was $50 million to the Point of the Mountain Front Runner Transit Stop. This received funding in last year's legislative session. It wasn't quite funded, still needs additional funding on top of that 50 million, but would be for a additional front runner stop at Point of the Mountain. And then lastly, you'll see that last box, about $75 million plus in legislatively directed projects. In other words, the legislature has said, these are specific projects outlined in funding bills or in specific bills for various projects. A number of these were in Salt Lake County. There was a bus facility funded in cash for Cache Valley Transit. There's a number here, and I'm happy to share some of some more information on those. I'll include our appropriations tracker so you can kind of look at more detail about what was ultimately funded, what's kind of rolled up into these totals here. But overall, a really significant and positive year for appropriations for multimodal transportation. So, Andrew.
Thanks, Miranda. Carson, before you go to the next slide, I'll just note first, thank you to the league, the terrific league team, and then to all of the cities for working together to achieve positive outcomes in the legislative session and also to avoid negative legislation in the session. It's terrific partnership that exists here in Utah. And I know I speak for MAG as well, but at WFRC and MAG and the other AOGs and associations of government and metropolitan planning organizations in Utah, we really value the partnership that we have with all of you working together. I'll note Miranda talked about the significant funding for infrastructure and the money that's going for transportation through UDOT and the Transportation Commission. A reminder that the place where state-funded projects first are born is in the long-range planning for the future of Utah. In the urban areas, that work is coordinated with and through the metropolitan planning organizations like WFRC and MAG, which are made up of the local governments, principally cities and counties. So our work together helps shape over time what the state also invests in. And of course, those roads run through your cities. They benefit your community. So that's great partnership there. I'll note as you're looking at this slide, most of it is state funding, transit funding, and some of you may be thinking, well, what about local transportation funding? Well, as Miranda noted, some of the other legislatively directed projects are actually for local governments. And also later in the presentation, we will talk about a bill not passed, HB 367 on transportation utility fees. That actually gets at the local ability to do a tough transportation utility fee that was not taken away this session. So that tool exists for you. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, if you would, Carson. We're going to be, as we're going through this, we're going to be tag teaming it around. And so this one is for me. There's been a few planning appropriations that relate to transportation. I'll talk about these briefly. You all heard about the Power District, the Fair Park, the area that is west of Salt Lake City, that is the area that's been designated as the desired home for new Major League Baseball team, which we're keeping our fingers crossed is going to happen. And there was legislation related to that on the land use side. On the transportation side, of course, if we have significant development that occurs in that area, and add to that the potential of a Major League Baseball team, the transportation impacts are going to be really large. And we need to plan them out and do them well so that people from all over can get to and out of that area. And also the people that live and work in that area can function and they're not overrun unnecessarily. So what that means is roadway access, transit as much as possible, trail walking access to get there. And so the legislature appropriated $500,000 for a study of transportation, technical study of transportation in that area, coordinated by the transportation agencies. Also, as Cam noted earlier, one of the things that often is an impediment or a challenge to absorbing growth effectively is infrastructure. And how does the market demand relate to the available development potential that is often limited by infrastructure, often city infrastructure? And so the legislature appropriated to GOEO $250,000 to do a market capacity analysis about how and where growth could occur, and then aligning that market demand with the growth in infrastructure capacity. More to come on that analysis as time goes on. It's just being organized as we speak now. Next slide, Carson.
All right, I'll take this one, Andrew. HB 430, so we're going to start getting into bills. There's a lot of different bills that passed in Lanice, Andrew, myself, and then the league will kind of run through each of these. But this one is really exciting and kind of a fun and innovative idea that ultimately, I say can be credited somewhat to Cameron and the league as coming out of the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission working groups for some innovative ideas for how to address some transit challenges that local communities are facing. So what this bill does is it would allow cities or groups of cities to propose transit innovation grant pilot programs. So this could be, specific bus service or shuttles between, high visitation areas. Really, there's a lot of options here on what this could look like, and ultimately cities can be the ones who propose what their transit needs are in their cities. And the grant program would be administered by our partners at UDOT in consultation with the Council of Governments, UTA, WFRC, and how those grant awards can be funded and prioritized. The funding for this program is funded through a few options: Transportation Investment Fund, or TTIF funding, and then local option sales taxes, including the fourth and fifth quarters, if imposed, right? And this isn't just for Salt Lake County. This is available everywhere, of course, and requires UTA you'll see that last bullet, requires UTA to provide reports on resources that are being spent in each community and the type of service being utilized for that community, so that cities kind of have an idea of how their area is being served by transit service. And so really an interesting idea. We really appreciate Representative Perucci as she worked with all the different transportation partners on this one throughout the session. Initially, it was maybe not quite so favorable in the way that it would have gone in the initial form of the bill, but we really appreciate her being willing to work with us on this, and look forward to hopefully seeing some really great innovative projects in various communities. So
Miranda, just a quick clarification.
Something here real fast, since
Right,
you
Cam.
referenced this came through the UEOC. A year ago at this time, at the League's mid-year conference, when we were in our caucus discussions of the different communities, we heard from multiple cities, from Murray to Harriman, from Provo to Ogden, and different leaders who were saying to us, how do we increase transit ridership? And there are multiple ways to get there. Either you increase service or you have new opportunities. But that was one of the themes that came out loud and clear from our outreach at the mid-year conference. That feedback from those cities turned into the Transit Innovation Grant concept that we took to the UEOC. The UEOC ultimately endorsed it, and then Representative Perucci, to her credit, took that concept and worked it in the bill here. So, Rand, I appreciate the shout out to us, but it really was League members bringing these ideas that then were translated here, and I think it will improve transit ridership over the long term. So I'm very excited about this bill, and kudos to Representative Perucci and Senator Colmore for their work on it.
And Cam, it's evidence, as you noted earlier, of the year-round legislative session and the policy-making process. Just one quick clarification. This is, as Miranda said, it's not limited to Salt Lake County, but it's the UTA service area that this program will be available in initially. And it's a modest amount of money. And so we want to temper expectations to a degree, and more information will be coming out in the months to come about timelines and applications. So stand by for more information as we head forward.
All right, I get to tackle Senate Bill 179. This is the Transportation Amendments Bill sponsored by Senator Harper and Representative Christopherson. This is the sort of annual transportation omnibus bill that Senator Harper does every year. It's a huge bill. It has more than like 2,000 lines on this one. There's 9 provisions I'm going to very, very quickly run through. One is it impacts the Transit Transportation Investment Fund, the TTIF. It removes that 30% match requirement for transit projects proposed by UDOT. The other provision that impacting the TTIF is that TTIF funds can now be used for a public transit study up to $500,000 per year for transit studies out of the TTIF. The bill also prohibits persons from keeping, storing, stockpiling flammable combustible materials beneath a bridge, overpass, viaduct, or tunnel owned by UDOT or UTA. Apparently that's been an issue. It requires the commission to develop an electronic titling system. So this is for any sale or transfer of a vehicle so that that transfer can be done electronically. It modifies the functions and duties of UDOT to now provide public transit services in consultation with relevant public transit providers. It modifies the state park access highways, some of those routes. It also modifies requirements for a person challenging the dedication of a highway, street, or road whenever that dedication happens to the public. So it changes some of the requirements there. And then the last provision I'll highlight on this one is that it modifies the clean vehicle decal and transmission sticker requirements. So for those of you that have an EV, if you use the HOV lane, you don't have to put that clean vehicle sticker on the outside of your car anymore. Just put it in your glove box. And then when you're asked by the omnipotent peacekeeper that is the police officer, then you can pull that sticker out and show them. And that's all for Senate Bill 179. All right, I gotta do this one too. This is Senate Bill 51, the Road Construction Bid Limits Bill. This one was sponsored by Senator Winterton. It increases the 2024 procurement bid limit for Class B and Class C road construction projects. So it goes up to $350,000 from, I think, about $190,000 is what it is currently. And then it also, for those procurements after 2024, it adjusts it using an inflation factor. It actually transfers it to the National Highway Construction Cost Index instead of using the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. It also prohibits a city or county from providing construction services to another city unless certain requirements are met. So take a look at that if that impacts you. It allows cities and counties to seek private bids for self-performed projects that exceed that bid limit. And then for self-performing projects, it does require that a city or county abide by certain testing, like testing of construction materials. And then your legislative body must actually, in a public setting and then post publicly, like on your website, that testing has been completed and it passes. So you've adequately tested construction materials. So that is the recap on Senate Bill 51.
Thanks, Lenise, and I'll take over for SB 28. This was the Scenic Byways program, Scenic Byway Program Amendments Bill. This became quite controversial during the session. It began its life in the interim process in response to the current Scenic Byway program sunsetting. A lot of times in legislation, they'll embed a sunset date for when it just automatically expires. So this program was going to end anyway, and Senator Harper wanted to find some middle ground to expand it. So what the initial bill would have done is it would have extended that date to 2030, but it also would have changed the structure of the group. It would have added a seat to the Outdoor Advertising Commission, and it would have actually localized, gone from one state committee to several regional committees. So if you wanted to create a new designation, you would have requested UDOT to form a commission for that specific area, and it would have had seating appropriate to that area. And so again, it was controversial. This bill went through a lot of different changes. I know there was a lot of pushback from various local governments. Where it ended up is now it still extends the sunset date to 2030, so 5 more years. It maintains the current commission, so it's not adding any new representatives, and it's not changing the structure to be more localized. It's keeping it at state level. But what it's doing is it's saying if you want to create a scenic byway, rather than the state committee having the ability to just go and designate it themselves under the statutory criteria, now they'll make a recommendation to the legislature, who can approve it by resolution. So if your community is considering doing this, you should just be aware of these changes. You'll still go through the state committee process, and they'll still have to put together findings on how it meets state criteria, but it'll be a legislative enactment, not a committee enactment. All right, and then the next bill is mine as well, Senate Bill 135. This is one of those future-proofing bills, I think. There's a few different provisions in here that are kind of exciting. First, it creates a regulatory framework for what the bill calls roadable aircraft. I like to think of it as flying cars. This is probably still a few years out, but a number of states are adopting these policies. At the Consumer Electronics Show this year, there was a couple different examples of flying cars. So this bill would govern how they can be used on roads, what kind of registration fees they pay when they're flying versus driving. So be aware this, if you have flying cars coming to your community in the next 10, 20 years, this will create the underlying framework for that. More relevant to local governments is it creates a new requirement, or extends the current requirements for planning around large public airports to public vertiports. I'm not aware of any vertiports that have actually been established within the state. That's still a local planning process, but if you have a public vertiport, you'll now need to plan for some of the airspace regulations within 500 feet of it. So again, if you have proposals coming to your community for a vertiport, just be aware of those requirements, because those will be new. The last piece of this, which is maybe the most significant for local governments, or at least the most immediate, is that it does change the requirements for foreign-made drones. If you are using these drones to inspect critical infrastructure, so if you're using these to inspect roads, bridges, water tanks, things like that, there are new requirements for how you store data, how you protect it from potential compromise or hacking. So you'll need to make sure that if it's a foreign-made drone, and again, my understanding is that the majority of local government-owned drones are foreign-made, but if you have one of these foreign-made drones, you'll need to make sure that it's not connected to the internet. If you are connecting it for an update or something, you'll need to make sure that all of that data is removed prior to connecting to the internet. So if you're updating it, if you're syncing it or something, that needs to be cleaned. If you're using it for live video streaming, the software managing that needs to be either approved by the National Defense Authorization Act or made by an American company. So again, this is fairly consistent with Homeland Security guidance, but just beware, if you have a drone program, you'll need to abide by this legislation. It probably makes sense to adopt a policy just governing the use of this data, making sure that you're compliant with state regulations. And then we'll turn it over to Lenise again for the next bill.
Nice, thanks, Carson. So this one, House Bill 449, Pedestrian Safety and Facilities Act. Essentially, this does two things. It now allows for Class B and Class C road funds to be used for bicycle safety traffic devices in addition to pedestrian safety traffic devices. So think of things like the SHARO, the shared lane pavement marking for bicyclists, or the flashing signs that crosswalks typically use, or those crosswalks on busy streets that have the overhead flashing signs. Those are the types of devices that can now be used for AT or bicyclists in addition to pedestrian. The other provision on this one is that UDOT shall now consider bicycle safety in addition to pedestrian safety when it comes to highway engineering and planning. And that one's it for that
I'll
one.
note on that one, this bill is a modest change, but that furthers our broad effort in the state to provide choices to people, to make sure that people can drive if they want, take transit if they want, and to bike and walk safely if they want. And that transportation safety, particularly for bikers and walkers, is so critical. You know, if kids or really anybody is going to be able to use a bike or to walk to get to school or anywhere to get to work, they have to know that they feel safe. Many of you are aware that sort of a complement to this is the work that the transportation agencies are doing right now to prepare comprehensive safety action plans. And your communities have been involved. Many of your communities have been involved in this work, and there's going to be federal grants that are available also for helping to improve roadway safety for all users as we go forward. We got to provide choices as we continue to grow. Okay. Next is mine. This is a resolution, so not a law. A resolution, of course, is an encouragement or a recognition of a policy or a principle from the legislature. And in this case, this one, HCR 11 from Representative Bridger Bollinger and Senator Cullimore, concurrent resolution recognizing the importance of cross-issue growth impacts, what we refer to in shorthand as the alignment resolution. As we are growing so fast, there are challenges that are at play in many different arenas. And you as cities, you know this, right? You don't have the luxury of thinking about transportation in isolation from your housing development, in isolation from your economic development, in isolation from your tax policy. All these things relate to each other. But oftentimes, decisions are sort of made in decision-making silos. This happens at the state level sometimes, as we have independent entities and agencies that are making decisions, and sometimes it happens at the local level as well. We actually do a better job of coordinating across these various topic areas of housing and transportation and economic development and open space and tax policy. We do a better job of coordinating those things than many other states do. But given that we're growing so fast and we have limited land, particularly on the Wasatch Front, to expand, it's really important to consider those cross-issue impacts, to align them to effectively absorb growth. So this resolution encourages, does not mandate, it encourages private sector stakeholders, the public, meaning state agencies and cities and counties, and also community partners, to consider all of these growth issues when making policy or funding decisions. It's a statement of principle, and we are anticipating that Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, GOPB, is going to be providing some more information and encouragement about this. And I know that our organizations, the League and WFRC and MAG, with the planning assistance that we provide, we're here to help you if we can as well in thinking about these complex issues of growth. WFRC has the Transportation Land Use Connection, the TLC program. MAG has the Technical Assistance to Governments, the TAG program, to help make this alignment better on these topic areas as we grow.
All right. The next bill, HB 335, this is another bill that underwent some pretty significant changes. The first version of the bill would have just restricted state grants to only nonprofit organizations. So no grants to local governments, no grants to, if there's a limited grant for a commercial entity. So it would have been a pretty carte blanche restriction. Where it ended up is a little bit different, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because what you'll see is a lot of these will probably have to be administratively adopted by different agencies administering the grant. So you'll probably need to look to administrative rule when you're actually looking at the grant details. But at a high level, it really creates more requirements for receiving and administering grants. Local governments, if you receive them, you'll have to propose a budget and deliverables prior to receiving the grant. So in many cases that happens anyway, but it's a little bit more statutory guidance on how that happens, what the requirements are. They'll have to be dispersed on a schedule. So it won't just be probably won't just be one lump sum of money if you get a grant. It'll be spread out a little bit more, and you'll probably have to do some more reporting throughout the process. Multi-state or multi-year grants will not be able to exceed 5 years. So you'll probably need to reapply, or there might be some additional limitations. Again, we'll look to administrative rule for what that actually looks like at different agency levels. And then there'll be more, it clarifies, I think, generally speaking, the legislative auditor already has discretion to look at how state grants are being used, but it provides more clarity there that they can look at that. And there might be some expectation of enhanced role for that office and looking at how these state grants are being used by local governments. And then there'll be additional guidance and requirements for state agencies. Again, if you have a state grant, be aware of this. Coordinate with the state agency who's giving that grant to make sure that they're aware of it and try to get some guidance on where they're going and what additional requirements they may be passing on to you with existing or new money. So again, this is one to flag for future work, but just be aware of this process.
Carson, this is an example of a bill. As you said, it started out in a really problematic way. It would have banned local governments from receiving state grants. And a lot of work happened on us from our organizations. And this is just part of the need and the benefit of having organizations like the League involved in the legislative process on the Hill every day during session, looking out, making sure we're promoting positive things and avoiding negative things from happening. So this is if you didn't know the backstory, you wouldn't realize that this is the result here is a success story from where it could have been. Okay.
Yeah, excellent point, Andrew.
Next one more transportation bill, and then we'll transition into a few other things. HB 488, this is a Representative Spenlove and Senator Cullimore bill that does a handful of things. Sometimes bills are referred to as Christmas trees or omnibuses. This is a potpourri bill, I would say. The first key thing that it does, and Miranda mentioned this earlier at the very beginning on appropriations, this is the bill that actually makes the ongoing funding available for commuter rail improvements. You know, that front runner system is the backbone of the Wasatch Front's transit system. So much land use is coordinated with that, and this bill provides additional funding on an ongoing basis to help enhance the front runner system, which is really terrific. Then it also makes some modifications to the local option transportation sales taxes that are available. So it does not authorize new taxes, but it makes some modifications to the rules for those existing taxes. In Salt Lake County, it says that the so-called fifth local option, that's the 0.20 local option transportation sales tax. Now the county portion of that, the 0.05 of the 0.20 in Salt Lake County, if Salt Lake County imposes it, could be used for public safety purposes in addition to transportation. It does not change the 0.05 of that fifth that would go to cities. So this fifth is available to counties to impose. And again, 0.05 of that would go to cities for transportation purposes distributed by the sales tax and population formula. That fifth has not been imposed. It has only been imposed in Utah County and Summit County so far, but it is available for imposition. Now, the other 0.1 of that is for transit uses, and I'll get back to that momentarily. It also makes a modification to an existing so-called second quarter. That's actually a 0.3. I'm not going to explain why right now. Ask me later if you want to know. That is on the books, but not imposed in most counties around the state. It's an eligible second quarter local option. And in 3rd through 6th class counties, if that is imposed, the county portion of that can also be used for public safety, not just for transportation. Miranda dropped a summary of this bill into the chat. If you want to dig in more detail, you can look at that or obviously ask us questions as well. Next, it does provide some funding for specific projects. This is just Salt Lake County provision out of the so-called County of the First Class Highway Projects Fund, which is a slice of the so-called second quarter and third quarter in Salt Lake County. I'm not going to go through the projects now. They're listed in the summary, but That's a slice of those quarters that actually is subject to legislative control, and the bill identifies funding going to those local, mainly city projects. And there's also some projects funded out of the rail restricted account also listed in the bill. Second to last, again, just in Salt Lake County, if the so-called fifth is imposed, that 0.20, a slice of that fifth money would go to the 56 West Express bus service. That's a UTA bus service. And then, and this is a little complicated, I'm not going to do it in detail, but the remaining portion of that fifth for the first 3 years, that would be about $100 million. Again, if Salt Lake County imposes this, would go into a new infrastructure bank for Salt Lake County, administered by UDOT, which would be available for loans for public infrastructure projects. Then that money would be paid back over a 20-year term, and the reimbursements of that initial loan from that first 3 years of revenue are directed to specific projects in Salt Lake County. After that 3 years, the revenue that would come in from that fifth would be for transit purposes, as was originally contemplated. And finally, it makes a modest adjustment to the funding that's now going from the TIF, the state sales tax that goes to Transportation Investment Fund, into the Cottonwood Canyons Transportation Investment Fund. It changes the $20 million a year to an equivalent percentage, so that amount can grow over time as the economy grows. It also directs a slice of that to the local governments in the area for doing traction control and safety in the canyons. Whew. Okay, that's the last piece on that bill. And then Carson, I think we're turning it back to you.
We'll actually go to Cam for the housing bills that do overlap with transportation infrastructure. So he will explain what these bills do and how there's sort of that connection.
Perfect. Thanks, Carson. And thank you to MAG and WFRC for the bill presentations thus far. Go ahead, Carson. So this could take the next 3 hours of your afternoons, which I'm not going to do, because we did that a week ago. There were multiple bills in this connection between housing and infrastructure. I'm not going to go into them in great detail, other than to emphasize that all of these tools try to bring together the principles of affordability, home ownership, and infrastructure. SB 208 makes some modifications to HTRZs. That's an existing tool, and the HTRZ is about the land use near the transit stop. But it also contemplates increased investment into the transit system in order to make that HTRZ and the other developments across the transit system even more efficient land use. So the pieces come together there. So even though it may not be new funding for infrastructure, it is trying to maximize the land use near transit and invest more in transit. With items 2, 3, and 4, these are all new tools that the legislature created. And we have slides that go into more detail. I'm not going to do that now because of the time, but just know we went into great detail at that previous webinar, and this PowerPoint does have the slides. But the SB 268, that's number 2 on the list, the First Home Investment Zone FIZ, that basically takes the HTRZ process, but applies it to a broader cross-section of areas. So if you're a community, let's say you're Cameron City, and you have Redwood Road running through your city, and you don't have any tracks or a front runner as part of it, but it's Redwood Road. It's a commercial corridor. It's an area where it makes sense to develop a medium density center in your city. You could use this new FIZ tool to create that center and then collect some tax increment from that center to help invest in the infrastructure outside of the center and outlying areas within your city, to invest in the infrastructure in those neighborhoods to meet owner-occupied and affordability requirements that a builder would then have to meet if they want to qualify for those tax increment dollars. So the idea is you have your center, which is tied into the transportation network. Some of the tax increment that you collect from that center could then be used on transportation or other types of infrastructure throughout the city has to zone for a certain residential density, but the builder also has to guarantee a certain outcome of affordability and owner occupancy in those surrounding neighborhoods, and to a lesser degree within that center. So from a transportation perspective, in order to get approval from the HTRZ committee, you have to still demonstrate that this is consistent with your transportation plans. But no, this is a new tool, it's a unique tool, but it's based off the success we've seen to date with HTRZs.
Cam,
Let
let me interject just quickly on this. As you're talking about centered development, the concept here from both the HTRZ and the FIZ is that areas that are city and town centers, the areas that you identify in your communities that are really good locations to absorb more growth, provide housing and transportation choices in your communities. The hearts, the sort of walkable hearts of your communities, that these are tools to help enable you to make those centers come to fruition in a way that you support, that works for your community. And again, they're not mandates that you have to do it. They are tools for you to help do it. And they are embodied in the Wasatch Choice vision that we have all adopted for the Wasatch Front, which contemplates helping absorb more growth in these mixed-use centers, which actually then can take pressure off of existing suburban and rural areas in a balanced way of absorbing growth. So if you're thinking, what might those centers be around the region, you can take a look at the Wasatch Choice Vision map, which identifies those transit centers and those other centers, and we'll drop a link to that in the chat now. Thanks.
You could also come into the league office. We have a huge floor to ceiling poster of the WFRC MAG Wasatch Choice Vision, where you can see where those centers are. You can also click on the link. Either one's fine. Number 3 is SB 168. That's the Affordable Building Amendments. The key piece here for transportation is that this is another tool for cities to fund infrastructure, so long as these housing units are both affordable and owner occupied for a period of time. This is really targeting infill type development. So type of development that likely already has some road infrastructure, but it can also be greenfield areas or areas that maybe don't have sufficient infrastructure, as long as it's 10 acres or less. So again, the link here is funding for infrastructure. Maybe in your community, that's transportation. Maybe it's not, but we wanted to make you aware of that. Then number 4, House Bill 13, infrastructure financing districts. I think this one, from a transportation perspective, has a lot of potential to fund the road projects that are necessary to unlock a lot of the housing units that cities are already planning for. A key component here is that the city approves the land use, and upon approval, then the property owners can create essentially a special service district that can finance this type of infrastructure, and then they can bond in the public markets at a lower price point to pay for the infrastructure. So they can build the roads or water, sewer, or whatever else, but they have to pay off those bonds prior to a homeowner purchasing a home on that lot. So Carson, you can slide through in the presentation here, but just actually stop on 268 if you go back to the one with the pictures. This is what Andrew and I were just referencing. Again, we went into great detail about it previously, but this will be part of the PowerPoint. And just know from it, as you're thinking about how do we pay for transportation in our city, if you've got little infill pockets of housing units, maybe there's a way to use a HOPS. If you have a mixed-use center you're trying to get off the ground, maybe there's a way to do a FIZ here to then unlock some other owner-occupied units elsewhere in the city and can pay for some of the transportation needs. Or if you just have large-scale greenfield areas that just need the new roads and you're planning for them and you're anticipating them, you just don't have the ability right now to pay for them, and that's where the HB 13 tool can come into place. So lots of different tools at your disposal. Carson, now you can pass along through here. one tool that is at your disposal that Andrew referenced a moment ago, even though the bill didn't pass, is House Bill 367. And this, there's an important nuance here that both Andrew and I have said, and I'm going to emphasize it now. Cities have the authority, per the Utah Supreme Court decision last winter, to impose transportation utility fees. The question that came out of that court case is, what is reasonable, reasonable being the key legal term, in the process for developing a transportation utility fee. House Bill 367 attempted to offer that question or answer that question about what is a reasonable process. And then it was also looking at municipal fee authority around broadband and public safety. What you see on this slide in front of you is league board principles. It says summer 2024. That should actually say summer 2023 because it was last summer, not looking ahead to this summer. But last summer, the league board outlined these 8 principles as we engaged in building out what became House Bill 367. Ultimately, we got to yes with the Taxpayers Association and other stakeholders on what we refer to as a comfortably uncomfortable bill. And it was comfortably uncomfortable because, admittedly, House Bill 367 made it harder for cities to impose transportation utility fees than the status quo right now under the court case. We felt like the trade-off there was worth it because we were codifying that process and providing some consistency there, which we thought was a win for future ratepayers, for future fee payers, as well as for local governments. And again, to the credit of the Taxpayers Association, they were also supportive of the bill and felt like there were some safeguards in the process in this bill that were consistent with their principles. So ultimately, we felt good about this outcome, and WFRC and MAG were involved in these deliberations last summer. Unfortunately, the bill did not pass for a couple of reasons. We anticipate a lot of attention on this topic this coming interim. So our request here is, if your city is considering a transportation utility fee, or even if your city is considering fees in the broadband or public safety space, which this bill would have curtailed, please notify us immediately, because we think it's important that we stand aligned with the spirit of this bill, even though the bill itself didn't pass. In fact, the term I used the other day when I was training on this bill was that it's somewhat of a safe harbor, because 71 members of the House of Representatives voted affirmatively for this bill, even though it didn't come up for a Senate vote. So there's somewhat of a safe harbor here if your city is interested in doing this. The whole reason your city would be interested in doing this is another tool to pay for the road maintenance and the transportation infrastructure needs in your community. It creates a dedicated account, so you're transparent with your residents that you're imposing this fee based on this methodology of the impact, and you're spending it this way on transportation. So again, if you're interested in pursuing this tool, please be in touch with us as soon as possible. WFRC and MAG teams, anything else you want to add on this one?
Just, I ditto. It's a powerful tool, and follow the HB 367 structure if you're going to do it.
Perfect. Okay.
All right, I'm going to tackle this other bill that did not pass. This was Senate Bill 155, the Road Usage Charge Program Amendments Bill. This is another bill sponsored by Senator Harper and Representative Christopherson. The bill would have, well, let me preface by saying that I think we will see this bill or a version of this bill again next year, and I'll let Cam and Carson and others speak to that in a minute if they'd like. But essentially, transportation revenues are just not keeping up with the needs. And so those things that we can do to try to increase the revenues into our revenues buckets is really, really helpful. So this bill would have done a couple of things. One, it would have increased registration fees for all vehicles, and then tied those registration fees to an ongoing annual formula, essentially tying it to CPI. And then it would have also regarding the road usage charge program, specifically the RUC program, it would have prohibited participants from withdrawing after a certain date, which was May 2024. It would have removed the RUC enrollment cap, allowing for more persons to participate in the program. And it would have importantly increased the RUC rate and it above that 1 cent per mile, and increased the cap, the annual cap as well. So I think one of the main reasons why CAM wanted to include this one is just local governments receive some of the RUC program revenue, and this one didn't pass. So Cam, did you want to add things?
Yeah, Lenise, you nailed it. This bill is less important than last year's bill on the road usage charge. And I just wanted to make sure for our faithful listeners out there that everybody recognizes that last year, MAG, WFRC, and the league worked to include local governments for the first time in road usage charge allocations. Prior to last year's bill, all of the potential RUC revenue would have stayed at the state, and that's because they were just getting the program underway. So you won't see any RUC dollars yet, but over time, as the RUC program gets its legs under it, and it starts to generate significant revenue for the state, it'll be shared with local governments. So this bill didn't pass, but the road usage charge program still exists, and there's going to be more and more attention and benefit from it in the years to come. So stay tuned on that front.
All right, that brings us to the end of the list of bills, but it brings us to the beginning of the interim agenda. So yeah, it was mentioned that neither of those bills passed, but there'll be more work on them. There's a whole lot of work on other things happening too. And this really should say interim agenda so far, because this list seems to grow by the day. As you can just kind of briefly see, there's a whole lot being discussed already, everything from annexation of the land use space to transportation utility fees. I expect we'll see some new ideas brought to the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, and those might be in the technology space, transportation, pretty much you name it. But the reason we're showing you this is to show that there's already a lot of discussions happening. If you want to be involved on any of these topics, please let us know. If there's any topics that you'd like to see ULCT or your MPOs work on, again, we've got a great partnership through the interim, through the legislative session. We really work proactively to try to get good policy through at the Capitol. So if there's things you'd like to see in the transportation planning space, please let me know. And I'll of course share these ideas with our partners. But yeah, you have my email there. Please reach out. We'll do one quick reminder on a bill that passed a few years ago on station area plans, and then we'll turn back to Cam to wrap up the meeting for the webinar.
Perfect. Thanks, Carson. This is a quick reminder. 2022 seems like forever ago now, but House Bill 462, I think, is a nice way to wrap this year's conversation up, because I look at House Bill 462 as the type of bill that really is generational, and a type of bill that 10 to 20 years from now, we'll look back and say, that was an excellent example of partnership that led to some really good outcomes. And some of the bills we talked about this year are in many ways cleanup bills from the game-changing legislation like HTRZs in 2021 and House Bill 462 in 2022. Mainly, we want to remind you that those of you who have fixed rail in your city, those of you who have front runner or light rail or BRT, you need to ensure that your stationary plans have been adopted by the end of 2025, which, based on my calendar, is still a year and 8 months away. But this is it's a lengthy public-facing process that, again, is designed to provide you with ultimate flexibility at the local level to meet the state objectives around planning for planning around transit stops. So contact WFRC or MAC for more information, because those are the entities that will ultimately certify these plans. But some of the bills we talked about today are like one and done bills. And then you have bills that truly are multi-year efforts. And in the transportation space, this is the one that may have fallen off the radar because it was a couple years ago, and some cities have already started it and some haven't yet, but 2025 will be here before we know it. WFRC Mag, anything else you want to add about our good friends, stationary plans?
I'll jump in and just note that if you go to our websites, and we could add links to the chat box as well, but we've updated our station area planning maps that are really useful. It's a really useful tool in identifying sort of where cities are in that process. And then I'll turn to Andrew or Miranda in case they have anything to add as well.
Just the station area plans are another element of helping us collectively achieve and implement the Wasatch Choice vision, which again is about your communities deciding what are the areas that you want to grow and how, in a way that provides benefits to your residents. I think that's all we've got.
All right, it's been question free, which is rare for us. So either we were terrific presenters, or people are furiously taking notes, or folks are multitasking, or all of the above. But any final questions or thoughts from folks before we wrap it? Sat map, I love that. Okay, well, this will be available on our website and through Friday Facts. So thanks everybody for joining us. WFRC and MAG, thank you for the partnership, and thank you for the great work together. And let's do it again next year.